So, in following up on blending or integrating internal and external equity, once we get the information on those benchmark jobs and what they are paid in other arenas, we decide on what salary ranges make sense for us. We develop what we call a market pay line. That market pay line goes from the lowest value job to the highest value job, and it should be a positive correlation between point value or value to the company and the pay that the individual makes, that the job will demand. It's really not what the individual makes, but what the job demand is. So that's your pay line. And now that pay line will move up and down depending on whether or not you're going to lead, lag, or match. So when we know what the market pays and we know what we're going to pay, then we make that determination whether we should pay above what the market pays, the same, or below. All those factors have to come together. So it's also internally consistent and externally anchored. And then we determine pay grades, which is it's groups of similar jobs, like within a particular skill set. So jobs that require a particular skill set, they will fit within a particular pay grade, and it has a minimum and a maximum that someone can make in that job title, in that particular range. And then the next range up is another pay grade. The higher level pay grade is jobs that require greater skills, and they should be making more money. And it's not just a job, it's groups of jobs that are similar in skills, similar in expectations, and they all will align up. So you see like a bar chart that goes from lowest to highest all the way up to show you what the pay grades would look like. And people should not be paid below that pay grade or above the pay grade. They should be paid within the range of that pay grade. There's midpoints, and then there's maxes and minimums, and you need to be paid within that range. So how do we ensure that, again, that we have good internal equity or individual equity, what's fair to the individual? Obviously, we want to make sure that our policies are set up that the pay is administered the same for everybody, and everybody who is working a similar job is within a similar pay range, allowing for variance, obviously, because of pay for performance and things like that, which we won't get into. But really, we want to make sure we have fairness in the way it's administered, and who gets, what job gets what kind of pay. Obviously, there are going to be differences in that pay range and between individuals based on how well they perform, how senior they are. The longer they are with the company, they will make more money. And some people have more experience when they walked in the door than others. Now, remember I said we don't want to pay above the maximum or below the minimum, and that's what red circling and green circling is. So a red circle is any employee who is paid more than the maximum in their range, and that should tell us that either they are ready for a promotion and should be put up in the next pay range, or that they have maxed out what they can make because of the fact that the range is set up. So perhaps we need to make adjustments to the pay range. And that might mean we need to look at market surveys to see whether or not we are lagging behind the industry in terms of how we pay people. And we might have to adjust our pay line up so we can get rid of our red circle problems. Our green circle problems refer to the pay of any employee who is paid less than the minimum, which tells us that we've got an issue of how we paid somebody. Sometimes green circle rates are people who are novices, someone who is new, who's on probation, and it may take a while for them to get into the pay range. And we could do that, but it's not always perceived to be fair. So it's a very good idea to make sure that we look at which of our employees are actually getting paid below what we believe to be the minimum for their pay grade, and make adjustments accordingly if they are not probational employees for any reason. There are companies that do person-based pay structures, and these are a little bit more challenging to do, but that's possible, because now we move away from saying a person should get paid X for a particular job, and we simply pay for competencies and skills. Whatever you bring to the table, we will compensate you for that. It's a lot more challenging to do, but it does give us a lot more flexibility. And we do see more productivity and higher quality, and lower labor costs. Now, you might argue lower labor costs means people are getting paid less than they deserve, and that's certainly possible. But what we see is people have better attitudes about it because they really feel like they are getting compensated for what they're bringing to the table. So there's pros and cons to it, whether you use a generic structure based on point values of the job versus competencies that the person brings to the table, to pay them that way. Either way, strengths and weaknesses, but most people use the more generic approach where we compensate for particular compensable skills, and each individual then gets paid based on that, at least at a baseline, with variance based on competencies down the line. With respect to things like executive pay, it's important to know the term pay dispersion. And pay dispersion basically means we're looking at the gap between the CEO, the highest paid person in the company, and the average worker pay. The larger the gap, the more employees perceive that to be unfair or inequitable. And often, CEO pay is off of our pay line. It's off of the chart. Right? It's usually significantly higher than the rest of the organization makes. We see a steeper curve, higher level, the higher you are in the company, which again gives perceptions of unfairness. And a number of years ago, the rate between CEO pay and the lowest person in the company was significantly lower. And what we've seen probably in the last 15 to 20 years, probably 20 or 25 years, is this, huge skyrocketing of CEO compensation, but not necessarily requisite improvements in performance. It's my big pet peeve, personally. I have issues with CEOs being paid a metric ton of money when their employees are being paid very little in comparison. So the Dodd-Frank reform, the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010, which came out of the mortgage crisis, right? And when we started to see heavy-duty CEO pay compared to their employees, the act requires all publicly listed companies to report their pay dispersion between the highest and the lowest, so people can know and make an informed decision. As of 2021, CEOs earned 399 times more than their average non-supervisory worker. So, and that's in the top, 350 publicly owned firms. It's pretty outrageous, in my opinion. Sometimes it's record profits, sometimes it's based on stock prices, but you and I know, right, and you should know, right, that just because the stock market may be doing well, it doesn't mean people are making money and doing well. We can have a really robust stock market, and all that says is businesses are doing well and CEOs are doing well, but when we have a higher pay dispersion, our lower level employees cannot keep up with the cost of goods. They can't afford to even purchase the things that they may be involved in making and producing. So it is perceived as unjust or unfair. And this is a big issue that I think is going to create a massive collapse in our economy in the near future, if not sooner than later, given everything going on right now in our economic situation. So there's a thing called pay compression and pay inversion. Pay inversion is a more severe example of pay compression, and pay compression basically works like this. So you have somebody who's been in a job and they make a certain amount of money, they've been there a long period of time, they're still the highest person in that company, but when we go and we hire a new hire for that particular position to add somebody to the group of individuals doing the job market pressures have increased what the pay would be for that position. So that means that the market pressure is putting more pressure on companies to pay new hires more. New hires expect more money. And we see this a lot in academia, right, where in certain places they get paid X amount of dollars, and then I get paid a certain amount, and then I get my pay for performance over the years, and I get more and more money over time. But new hires, it outpaces what the cost of living and performance adjustments I've gotten in my own pay. So new hires come in almost making similar pay to what their colleagues do. And this often happens in lower level jobs, or a lower level job is making more than a higher level job because of pay compression and pay issues with the market and what the market bears. And pay inversion, as I said, is just more extreme. It's really huge pay gaps. It's basically the same idea. When we want to look at how we administer the pay and sort of figure out where people are in that pay range and what is fair or equitable, we do what we call a compa ratio. And that compa ratio gets at how close the individual is to the midpoint of the pay range. So let's say you have a range that goes from, and I'm just going to keep it simple here, from $10 to $20 an hour. And so 15 would be the midpoint. Now, this is not necessarily realistic. This is just for illustration. So the midpoint is $15, right? And my compa ratio, if my compa ratio says it's 1.5, I'm making 1.5 times that midpoint range, right? I might be making a little bit more. Or compa ratio of 2 means double. But the goal is to kind of get a sense of where you are proportionately compared to the midpoint. Higher compa ratios means they're way above the pay midpoint, and below 1, between 0 and 1, would be below that midpoint. Obviously, we can look at those compa ratios to give us a determination if compression and inversion is going on. It's very important that we make sure pay is transparent, that there are no secrets. A company cannot legally, and you should know this from other lectures that we've done, a company cannot tell people they're not allowed to talk about pay. They are absolutely allowed to talk about pay with their colleagues. That is considered a protected action on the part of labor, and it is covered under the National Labor Relations Act. Even if it is non-unionized, they still have to adhere to that. So organizations that do a good job of being transparent about pay, they don't suppress communication, they are as open about it as they can. We want to make sure we decrease secrecy, because secrecy is where inequities happen, and we want to make sure that we don't have pay inequities based on race or gender or sex or anything along that line, but particularly in comparison under the Equal Pay Act, right? We want to make sure things are transparent, so we don't have problems with people saying they're not being paid fairly or correctly.